Hey guys, Pawnce here, and today I just want to talk about one of my favorite games of all time, if not my actual favorite game. It's definitely up there somewhere. I really had a lot of fun with this thing. Release Everquest. So I'm currently playing on a server, an emulated server called Project 1999, which seeks to basically emulate and recreate the super old release experience of the game. Although this one also includes the first two expansion pack, the Kunark one and the Velius one. But in any case, I just want to share my thoughts and sort of my experiences on it, and just sort of compare the game to what's stuff that's been released more recently. Um, I got a lot of memories sort of tied into this game. As I said, I had a hell of a lot of fun with it as a kid. But anyway, just sort of a brief explanation of what's going on here with this game. It was a very in-depth game. You had a choice of 12 races initially, 13 if you want to consider or count the not the Bashir, the Ixar, and 14 different classes. So there was a lot of things to pick from, and then there was like actual stat allocation at the beginning of the game, and stats didn't matter, if you got super late game, but at the beginning of the game, depending on what you picked, stat allocation could mean quite a bit. You would actually pick a deity to follow, and that could like change what starting city you would start at. Like certain races, some could only start in certain starting cities, and there were just kind of a lot all over the map. Like how many were there? I don't remember off the top of my head. There's probably like 5, 6, 7, maybe more. So there was a lot of choices right at the beginning. There's a lot of freedom in the game in general, which I kind of miss in games. Currently, I'm actually in my favorite zone right now. I spent a lot of time here. This one's called the East Common Lands. It was on some servers, actually most servers, it was the general kind of seller zone because auction houses didn't exist. What you did is you just spammed your items in chat and you sort of hawked your wares here. And there was just sort of like this agreement between players that this would be the zone, which is going to be a reoccurring theme in what I'm going to be discussing. There's like a lot of player decided things. Certain other servers, I hear that they did it in the Elf zone, and it was called Greater Fadark, so they called it the G Fay Bay, I think, something like that. But anyway, this is the East Commons Market. I'm playing right now at 2 a.m., so there's not a hell of a lot of people here. There's probably more in the morning. I just started playing on the server. Well, I played briefly on another character years ago, but yeah, so everyone just kind of sits here and shouts their stuff. And actually, original EverQuest. It looks like this server does have item linking, but you couldn't link items in the original EverQuest. You had to unless you were confident that everyone knew what you were talking about and had stats on items memorized, and there was tons of items in this game, where there are tons of items, you would just type the actual stats out manually, which is like this unthinkable chore, I suppose, in sort of more modern games. But yeah, now of course you can just click this and all kinds of stuff going on here. I remember the original East Common Lands, this chat would be flooded, like it would be moving this fast. I'm scrolling just up and down, but it would actually be moving about this fast, and you would have to you would get good at just sort of filtering stuff, and you'd sort of see things, and you'd be like, oh, there's an item, and you would stop the chat for a minute, and then you would see this guy selling stuff, and it was so chaotic, it actually could work to your advantage if you were good at this. I remember, since I also had prices memorized, and a lot of people didn't, I would see something for sale really cheap, and then I would talk to the guy. I would manually message him. You had to interact with other human beings in an MMO, and unthinkable. And then I'd make him an offer for slightly less than his already really good price, and usually they'd say, yeah, sure, whatever, because they just want to sell their stuff and get the hell out. They weren't a career merchant like me who camped at like this zone. And then I would buy it, I would make my investment, and then I would flip it, and I would just go around selling it for a slightly better, or slightly, depending on which side of the coin you fall. I would sell it for a bad price, essentially, for a slightly inflated price, and I would just kind of keep flipping items, and I actually made a lot of money. And my main character back in the day was a Shadow Knight, same as actually what I'm playing right here, a Shadow Knight. And I never actually got to a super high level because, I was a kid. I didn't have a hell of a lot of time to play. Or I could have, but my parents didn't like games so much, so I was somewhat restricted. But anyway, so I never got a particularly high level, but my character was decked out in this really awesome gear because I was very smart about the buying and selling system, and I was very efficient with my time. And I kind of put in work. So, and again, sort of an intersection of that sort of market freedom and just sort of the freedom of the game in general. Another story that I remember that I really liked is I was in a zone called, what was it, Inner Thule Swamp. Yeah, it was the troll, not the troll. No, Innerthule Swamp was the, never mind. The Ogre starting zone was, I don't actually remember what it's called, but anyway, where's an Ogre? They're quite large. I think there's one over here. No, these are all trolls. Man, there's no ogres. But anyway, yeah, the Ogre starting zone, there were guards, and guards were very powerful in this game. But you could like high-level characters would kill them and farm them for EXP and items and stuff like that. And there was, in that particular zone, I don't know if they still drop these things, but guards would drop this thing, or a specific guard would drop something called a crude stein. And you could only hold one of these items at a time because they were called a lore item, so you couldn't like amass them. So these high-level guys would just kill all these high-level guards, and there was a bunch of corpses on the ground, and they would have these things called, or these crude steins, and I would pick them up. And I couldn't, continuously just hoard them. And they weren't actually that good of an item, but they had impressive stats on them. That was the other thing. Like, stats on items were not necessarily rare, but they were much more high-level things, and they were much, much more conservative. Like, if you saw at a low level, an item with like 2 strength or something lame like that on it, you go, oh my god, this is a magical item. This is like the rarest thing ever. I'm covered, like, currently on this character, I'm just decked out on mundane bronze gear and banded mail and something called a shiny brass halberd, which none of this stuff has actual stats on it except my rings. And so and then that was the standard back then. Anything with actual stats on it was just kind of considered something special. So even though the stats were kind of crappy on these crude steins, they actually had a lot of charisma on it, which is not a very useful stat unless you're sort of an enchanter. And so what I would do is I would type in /who all. This is very crude and like kind of whatever commands here. So I type /who all. It was something like 20 to 40 enchanter, and then it would list all the enchanters in the game between those levels, because roughly that's around the level that I figured people would want this item at. And I would individually message them. So yes, I was like an automated calling system. I was spamming people if they wanted to buy these items, and I would give them a price. It was something between 20 and 100 platinum, which was a lot. I kind of spoilers. I made my fortune off this very early on and got quite a head start. And then I sold a whole bunch of these things to individually to these guys, and I would like run this item over to them, and the run could take a while, or I'd call them over to me. Well, I didn't want to call them over to me, because then they might figure out where the item was dropped and figure, wait, you're ripping me off. But anyway, so I would sell these items just, because the freedom of the system allowed it. I was following around a high level, cleaning up after him as this low level guy, and I took this sort of entrepreneurial spirit and saw an opportunity there. Aside from that, when I wasn't doing stuff like that, I would collect bone chips. So I was in the trenches and killing these low-level mobs, collecting bone chips and just kind of low-level components that would drop off of low-level mobs, and then sell them to higher-level players, because you still use them at higher levels for like 5 platinum a stack and stuff like that. Another thing is like quests weren't really a thing. I know people are very, very used to sort of the idea of questing in games. So kind of ironically, Everquest didn't actually have that many. Well, it had quests, but they were rare and they were hard to find, and most of them sucked. But sometimes you'd run into really cool quests, and it felt really neat when you actually did these things, because they were like, they tended to involve multiple zones spanning the entire world, and the world is really big, which we'll get into in a minute. And while you were running around just killing stuff, you would just pick up these items, and you would find out later, it's a quest item. Okay, I have this thing. I can do it now. It's not like I had to be on the quest for the item to drop, sort of stuff like that. So your inventory could get kind of cluttered, but it was very interesting. Oh yeah, of course, yeah. As I was saying, the world was just sort of very big. It took a long time to travel in general, unless you're one of the teleporting classes, but that was kind of a high-level thing where you could pay people to teleport you. But, you actually had to sit there and wait for boats, and boats took time to travel through the world, or like these ocean zones. And it was just, I don't know, it was a bit tedious, but at the same time, it made the world feel like very big and kind of like an actual world, and there was sort of accomplishment from getting from one like side of the map to the other for a very specific purpose. Oh, and of course, certain factions just absolutely hated you. So if you weren't absolutely certain what was where, and you could be traveling around, and a guard would pop out of nowhere and destroy you, because I'm a dark elf and he's a human, and humans hate dark elves. And of course, you would get knocked all the way back to your bind point as the where wherever you last bound your character to, which could be, I don't know, like an hour away. and so you'd have to make the run back. So you had to be very careful about things. There was a lot of investment in just sort of paying attention to what you were actually doing. Speaking of factions hating, for example, this guy hates me. He glowers at me dubiously, which means he's not going to kill me outright, but he's not going to sell to me. Like, I talk to him, and it says, "It's not enough that you Darkhells have ruined your own land. Now get lost." So he won't sell his stuff to me. If he was I believe one faction level below that, he would actually attack me and kill me, because he cons red, which means he would destroy me. What would you like your tombstone to say? Yeah, that's what that means there. Aside from that, oh yeah, of course there weren't mobs for absolutely everyone. If you went into like a dungeon, they could be overcrowded. There was no instancing, nothing like that. And there were like these player-made systems in place to ensure that, kind of people, well, not always, but, usually people would wait their turn, and you'd run into a zone, do a camp check, and then you type /shout, and then do like camp check or whatever in the zone you were in, and then people would respond saying, okay, I'm at the upper courtyard, I'm in the throne room, etc., etc. The groups would respond, so you'd know everyone. And these were all player designated names, like nicknames to very specific camps and zones. So it was a very sort of organic feel to everything like that. Of course, in terms of these player-made systems, there was also stuff like there were no maps in this game, at least not originally. So famous landmarkers would have nicknames that were commonly understood. So, for example, in the Dark Elf zone, there was something called a newbie log, and then if you offset the direction, and then a lot of newbies would level around there because there was a lot of low-level mobs, and if you offset the direction the log was pointing in by a few degrees to the right, you would roughly end up at the entrance of the Dark Elf city, which was like, there wasn't a direct path leading to it. It was kind of hidden, which makes sense. Dark Elves kind of sneaky, whatever. So that's how like Dark Elf newbie players would remember where their own damn city was. But of course, the newbie log wasn't super safe either, because in zones there could be high level mobs. It wasn't like this very strict, this is a newbie zone, this is the high level zone. No, like you'd get like in the newbie area, every once in a while, a high-level Kodiak bear, not high-level, but, it would be like level 10 plus or something like that, and it would completely destroy newbies because it would auto-aggro them because it's a bear, and it would just kind of kill everyone. So people would be shouting, stuff like Kodiak bear near newbie log, and then all the newbies would know to avoid the newbie log at the time until it left. Because death was not a good thing. Like, you would lose EXP, like, depending on how far you were into the game. Like, you could lose an hour of progress, possibly more, especially if you include travel time back to your corpse. Right, you had to go back to your corpse to collect your stuff, so while you were going back to the corpse, you were naked, which was could be a very harrowing experience. If you were at the bottom of a dungeon, that could be like extra terrifying, because unless you get back to your corpse in a certain amount of time, you'd lose everything. It was a generous amount of time, to get a week or something, but it was hard to get back to things sometimes. I never actually lost a corpse, but it certainly made dungeons like a very daunting and sort of scary prospect, especially if you didn't know the dungeon very well. And dungeons could be very confusing in this game. Like, there are pitfalls, just weird traps, stuff like that. And so there were ways to get your corpse back. Like, you could, I think, give permission to someone to drag your corpse or something like that, but they could steal your stuff or something. I don't remember. This was a long time ago, and I haven't had to do that in a long time. But there were certainly a lot of dangerous aspects to that. Now, I just got to get back to this concept that since I was a kid, I didn't actually experience the entire game. I kind of made it to the mid-level stuff. Never did any actual raiding. But again, the game was just sort of so big. There was a sense that the game was bigger than me, and I didn't feel entitled, I suppose, to having to experience everything. There was an element of mystery, or an element of mystery to the game. What else can I possibly experience? What's going on here? I didn't have to know everything. It made things a lot more interesting to me. And as I mentioned, there wasn't this super clear-cut, segregation between the high and the low, the newbie and the high player. As I was saying, I kind of blurred that line a lot by, for example, the Stein or the Crude Stein example, sitting around in this zone, buying and selling, since no drop items were uncommon. Basically, the only way you could restrict someone's gear, aside from race class limitations, was were no drop items, and then there weren't like that many pieces of gear that were called no drop, meaning you couldn't like trade them. So you could get very, very close to the best gear in the game just through trading early on. No drop was introduced later, but I'm not here to talk about later EverQuest. So, I mean, there was all kinds of very interesting experiences where just like running into a person wearing full bronze when I first started looked really cool. It was like, wow, this guy has orangish armor. What is that? Bronze. Wow, I want to get that one day. And then, I'd get full bronze. And then later, the next step is when I was still a fairly low level. I ran into a guy wearing full lambent armor, which is like a bard specialty thing. I was like, wow, you can wear blue armor? That's the coolest thing. Just because there was such a scarcity in terms of the interesting stuff. So I don't know, like the game, a lot of sort of the newer MMOs, it didn't feel like a spreadsheet, essentially, like an Excel spreadsheet. Like it just kind of felt like it had a very sort of real world quality to it with its imperfections, the pointless stuff, just the general inequality. Like, there's just kind of stuff that's there for the sake of being interesting. Like, for example, a lot of the cities are filled with details that don't have anything to do with actual gameplay, but, it's there kind of thing. Kind of makes me think of like, this is a quote from The Matrix. They were talking about, there was the original version of The Matrix that was, it was like too perfect or something, and then so like the human mind wouldn't accept it, and then so it destroyed itself or something like that. It kind of makes me think of that, where like new MMOs are a bit too pristine, like there's none of that pointless just for fun. It make it feel like a real world sort of thing going on here, whereas this, had a lot of just purely for the sake of it being a world kind of thing. For example, another example, I'm standing in front of this thing. This is an asp. There were certain mobs you just didn't want to fight, even though this thing cons green, meaning it's really weak and way lower than me. I don't want to deal with this thing because it poisons you, and poison in this game was absolutely awful. So you had to kind of know these things, like you had to know the world and understand it. For example, running around killing these guys, probably a good idea. That are bone chips, as I was talking about earlier. It's a good source of money for low-level players. If I killed this orc, I'm going to get faction with certain people, and then lower faction with other things, which could have consequences. Well, I mean, orcs. In that case, that doesn't really matter. This will-o'-the-wisp thing here, these things are nice things to kill. Because they can drop, what is it called, greater glowstones or something like that. But you have to have a magic item to kill them, which are not the most common thing ever. Is this thing magic? Yeah, this item is magic, so I could actually kill this thing right here. So let's go, actually I need to watch it. I think some NPCs actually attack me here in this zone because I'm a dark elf. So we're going to pull this thing over here. We ran through the house. Is that... I don't remember. There are a couple things that will just auto-aggro on me because, yeah, I picked an evil race. So we're just going to fight this thing really quickly. I don't think there are any super high-level mobs in this zone. Unlike, I think, the next zone over, West Commonlands. What the hell is that thing called? Griffins can spawn, if I recall correctly. Which are, like, in their 40s, I think? Or maybe their 30s. In any case, as level 18, you don't want to be dealing with that. So combat has a much slower pace to it. And since it's such a low level, there's no sense of risk. But if anything's even remotely near your level, there's always the chance that, you could go down. Because they take forever to kill. Additional things could aggro on you. It wasn't like, newer MMOs where you just kind of take on huge mobs of things. I know there's probably some druids and enchanters and stuff. Or not enchanters, bards and stuff like that that are screaming. But we're not going to talk about those. We're talking to people who are not too familiar with the game here and sort of the basics. But anyway, I'm going to try and get this thing as quickly as possible so we can end the video, because I don't have actually anything else to talk about beyond this. Other than really, I suppose I'm probably going to be streaming this, I think. It just seems like... Oh, God damn it, it's going towards the... Is that a... Oh, shit. I don't want to get close to this inn. I'm going to back off. Eventually these things come back towards you. I don't remember if these innkeepers get pissed off at you or not. So I'm just going to sit back here. What the hell is this? Someone dropped a jewel on the ground. That's cool. But anyway, so I was planning on actually just streaming this thing. I believe you're allowed to stream emulated servers, at least this one anyway. on twitch.tv/Pawnce if people happen to be interested. Probably over the next few days until I get bored of it again. But alright, here we go. Now we can get this thing, and let's see if he drops the Greater Lightstone, because that'll sell for about 20 platinum, I believe. Oh, I still got experience. Wow, actually, I got the Greater Lightstone. So as you can see, it makes things a lot brighter. I could keep it. Light was pretty important. Not so much for me, because I'm a dark elf. I could see in the dark, but I remember at release, I don't know about how it works on this server, but humans would actually not be able to see at all in the dark. It was just terrible. Like, if I turned my gamma all the way down, perhaps we could simulate, like, how difficult it was to actually see in this game if you're human, but there's a decent little light source there, which I don't need, so I'll probably sell that. I'm only sitting on, what is it? Yeah, 30 platinum, roughly, which is not very good. You can see people in chat here selling stuff for thousands of platinum, so... Anyway, that's really it. As I said, might want to stream this for the next few days. So, thanks for tuning in. I hope maybe I was able to convey sort of my enthusiasm for this game. I don't know how interesting that is, but I just kind of had to talk about it since, I did actually reinstall the game. So I'm going to get the hell out of here. Thanks for watching again, and goodbye.